experience here at Owen. Okay. So yeah, my name is Russi. I had grown up in Zimbabwe, but to Greek parents. So I have a much longer first name, Gerasimos. So I made the hop over the pond here to the US in 2017. Went to undergrad at the University of Miami, and then in my senior year, I decided that I wanted to pursue a career in finance, and my undergrad major kind of wasn't aligned, and obviously Miami is a great school, but it didn't have the same feeder kind of pipeline into banking, which is the career I wanted to pursue. So I looked to Owen. I'd seen all over all over the rankings and in forums how impressive the MSF program was. So I started my application process in February of last year, and was very lucky to get a place in this year's cohort. So been in Nashville for 8 months. So very sad to be leaving in a couple months now. You all are on kind of the other end of that, on that coin. So envious in the sense that you'll come in and get to experience the new buildings and all that Owen has to offer. But I'll be moving to New York in June to start a job at it's a boutique bank called Cowen, and very happy to have some of my classmates moving up to the city with me. I'll be rooming with someone else from my cohort, and we've got a group chat going, and very excited to explore the city. So happy to answer any questions as it pertains to banking specifically, or to the MSF program. Or honestly, Owen as a whole. I mean, I've had a great time interacting with people from all across the different programs. I actually just played basketball this morning with a guy in the NBA who lives in my building. So any questions, you're welcome to ask them, or you can get in touch with me outside of this call. So yeah, that's kind of my overview.
Thanks, Russi.
Mm-hmm.
I see Brooke is on. So Brooke, do you want to get started, and then we can get into the student panel?
Absolutely. That sounds good. Russi, thanks for doing the intro. Okay, first off, I'm gonna hit record. Just want to give everybody a heads up on that. Oh, actually, let's see.
I think I already hit record.
Oh, did you? Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, good. We're all set. Awesome. Thank you for thinking of that. I want to make sure we didn't forget it. So first off, just curious to hear from everybody who's joining us. If you don't mind, in the chat box, go ahead and let us know where you are right now. Those that are incoming students that are joining us, where are you zooming in from today? We're just curious to see where everybody's from, and we're trying to find a good time of day that we could make sure that we weren't interrupting with work and things like that. So yeah, please go ahead and in the chat box, let us know where you are right now. Great, we've got a New Jersey, Delhi, Pune, India, Morocco, Santiago, Chile, Japan, India. Oh, it's got to be late in Japan right now. Brazil, wonderful. Another Delhi, Mumbai, Seoul, Korea, India. Wow, that's great. Excellent. It's always fun to see where folks are coming from. Thank you all for joining us. I know for some of you it's the end of the workday, and for some of you, like Alex, Sasha in New Jersey, you're just into the morning. So it's exciting to get to connect with you all. So we've got a couple of things that we're going to do. Most of our time we're going to do a panel, and you're going to get to hear more from Russi and the other students who are joining us. But first off, we've got a little bit of content that we're going to go through. So I'm going to share my screen here, and Emily, I will let you take things from here.
Sure. So you can advance it to the next screen so we can see. So my name is Emily Anderson. I am the director of the Career Management Center. I'm also a graduate of Owen from 20 years ago. And well, more than that, probably 23 years ago. And I've been at Owen for 20 years this year. So the whole time in the Career Management Center. So we have a great group of people that you will get to know over the next year to 2 years, depending on if you're an MBA or an MSF student. So this is a team that will be here to support you. So we have student coaches. So those are the folks that you will work with closely on things like getting your resume ready, helping you do career exploration, helping you prepare for interviews, things like that. So those are the student-facing coaching teams. So on the MBA side, you would be working with Sandy, Courtney, Alex, Brooke, and myself. Brooke actually does a lot of special programming for and cultivates resources for international students. If you're an MSF, Jenny Ling is a dedicated MSF coach. And for those of you that are doing pre-3 right now, you may have already spoken with Jenny. If not, you will speak with her once you finish going through the course in the pre-3 course. So she's our dedicated MBA coach, and she has spent over 10 years in the financial services industry. So she's coming with industry experience as well. And then we have our employer relations and recruiting team. Heather Yockey manages that team, and Elizabeth has just left us to join one of our recruiting partners. So we're currently interviewing for Elizabeth's replacement, but we should have one in place by sometime in May. So they interface with the recruiters. They are the ones that set up events, interview schedules, presentations by companies. They work on, we hopefully this year we'll be back to doing student career treks. We haven't been able to do them for the last 2 years because of COVID, but we're hopeful that we will be able to visit some companies in the fall. So they arrange those. So anything that's recruiter facing, that's our team. We also have lifetime career services. So Lacey Nelson and Sylvia Boyd work with our alumni population. So you probably won't interact with them immediately, but maybe over the course of your time after graduation at Owen, you may decide you want to reevaluate and maybe move or change careers. So those folks work with our alumni population. So I wanted to put this up before we have a panel, because the theme of this particular session is really around the differences between perhaps your recruiting process and actually recruiting culture that you may have in your home country versus what it's like in the US. The US is, with graduate business degrees, there's a lot of recruiters that hire business graduates, but many of you, probably most of you, will be also looking for work authorization and having a company sponsor you for work authorization if you intend to look in the US. But I wanted to bring this up because in the US, there are certain career areas that many graduate business graduates look into, and some of them contain within the process itself, there's much more networking or building a professional network to basically get on an interview list. So I wanted to put this up because we show this to all, especially incoming MBAs, to give them a sense of what it might be like. And I think it makes it's more resident even for an international student where this might be very different from your process you've gone through before in looking for new positions. So there's certain work that's client facing, where an MBA or an MSF would not only be responsible or doing work for the firm, you're also representing the firm. So you're client facing. If you're a consultant, if you're a banker, you're dealing with a huge set of clients. And the recruiting process mirrors business development. So basically you are introducing yourself and developing a professional network as if you are representing yourself, as if you are representing a firm to get a potential client. So that's especially prevalent in things like consulting and banking. And so we call those networking driven recruiting processes. There's still an interview. There may still be a technical assessment. Certainly in consulting, there's case interviewing, and in banking, there's usually financial valuation or accounting technical questions that you would get. But you're also going to need to meet the bankers or the consultants that are a part of the recruiting process. And so wanted to make sure you understood that it's not just you drop your application for a job posting. You are selected based on the merits of your resume, and then you get invited to an interview. It's more complicated than that. And I think the panelists we have can actually delve into the specifics of that. But wanted to introduce that concept right now so you know, because part of what we want to do over the course of the summer is help you feel more comfortable with introducing yourself, understanding your transferable skills, and being able to position yourself in the recruiting process to maximize the success that you could have.
Thank you, Emily. I think that's so important, because one of the things that we notice as we work with international students is when we hear from folks that are graduating or that are wrapping up the program, they keep emphasizing how important networking is. And also, of course, we're talking with current students, and they recognize that too. And networking can look really different from one place to another, one country to another. So it's one of the things we're going to be talking a lot about with our panel. But I'm hoping that this is at least getting you thinking that the job search that you do at Owen and the internship search may look different from those that you've done before. And we're gonna get into that more next. So next, what we want to do is hop into our student panel. We're going to spend most of the rest of our time in this panel. We've got a few things we'll touch on before we wrap up. But I'm really excited. We've got a great group of Owen students that you're going to get to hear more from. So maybe what we'll do is, Russi, if you don't mind giving another quick, brief summary of your introduction. Tell us a little bit about where you call home, what you did before Owen, what program you're in, anything about work that you did, whether you did a summer internship or any work during the school year, or just talking a little bit more about what you're going to be doing after graduation. And we'll kind of move through the rest of you all in the order on the slide.
Yeah, be happy to. Sorry for jumping the gun earlier there, but I think, yeah, I can speak to my earlier experience. So I finished at the University of Miami in 2020. I took the year during COVID to go back home and spend some time giving some thought to what I wanted to do longer term. I worked with my family's company at the time, and I had some hands-on experience with valuation, but nowhere at the level of complexity I think that I've now been able to see through my time at Owen. But it certainly set me up well to have an understanding coming into the program. MSF, I can look back now and say that the year flew by. It's a really fast-paced, engaging program, and I've felt with my experience it's been a very close-knit cohort. So the 80 people I'll be in 3 weeks time standing up there at graduation with. You start out with really no understanding. I mean, you have a few calls like this to get to know each other, but it's only when you step foot in Nashville, and especially the early parts of the program is just very networking heavy. So I think if this conversation kind of the bulk of it is to do with recruiting and networking. I will say that there's a whole bunch of networking to do with your classmates as well, and that's what I found over the last year. So although it's important to be reaching out to people in industry, that core group, that cohort you come into Owen with is going to serve you for your career and truly really makes the experience. As for career, investment banking had excited me before coming to Owen, and you just get an understanding. When you speak with alumni, when you go through the motions, the whole recruiting dance, as Brooke mentioned, it can be a lot of calls, a lot of prepping for technicals. So with my process, it was only really in December where it kicked off. You know, I'd been networking with a bunch of alum and people on Wall Street, and had been invited to some interviews towards the end of the year. And these processes move quickly. I mean, you go from a couple of calls a week to all of a sudden you've got super days scheduled, and that can be 5 or 6 calls scheduled on one day with people in a group. But happy to answer questions, and I'll let Shweta, kind of give her introduction now.
Great, thank you, Russi.
Russi. Hi everyone, I'm Shweta Ramamurthy. Congratulations on your admit. Really excited to see all of you on campus this fall. I'm MBA class of 2023. Well, I've spent a lot of my time in Singapore, but India would be home. That's where my parents and my dog live. So yeah, that's home. I will be a strategic financial analyst at Adobe this summer. Academics wise, I am pursuing concentrations in finance and strategy, and I'm pushing for accounting as well. Let's see how that goes. Post graduation, I hope to take up a similar strategic finance role in the technology industry. Hopefully Adobe will want me back, but yeah, that's the kind of role and industry that I want to be in.
Great, thank you, Shweta.
Hi everyone. I'm Sharmila Bhide. I'm from Pune, India, and I read one of you is also from Pune. So if once you come here, we can chat about that. I'm a chartered accountant, which is an Indian equivalent of the US CPA. I was working with EY for 3 years before I came here. At Owen, I'm part of the MBA class of 2023. I'm specializing in finance and strategy. I'm going to McKinsey for the summer, and like Shweta, I'm hoping they want me back after the summer.
That's great, thank you.
Good morning, no, good afternoon, for some people. My name is Ryo Sky, and I am also an international student, and I'm from Japan. And I used to work in the finance, especially like a primary side and transaction. So this summer, I uniquely experienced the 2 internships here in United States and Japan. So I worked here at KPMG New York. So I was an intern of economic valuation services, whose main function is to evaluate companies. And then I also experienced internship in Japan. I worked at Eli Lilly as a financial specialist. So a little bit unique experience, like simultaneously doing 2 internships. So I'm happy to share my experiences, but also happy to answer your questions if you have. So that's it.
Wonderful, thank you, Ron. All right, so you know what? I'm going to stop sharing the screen so we can all see each other a bit more. So here with what I'm planning to do with the panel is I've got a couple of questions that I've shared with our panelists. So I'm going to plunge into some of those questions. And then after just a little bit, I'm going to turn it all over to you. So any of you that have questions that you might want to ask either the whole group or certain members of the group, start thinking of those. So as we're working up to that, the first question I have for the panel, and this is for anybody who wants to speak to it, is how, from your experience, is doing an internship and job search in the United States, how is it different from what you experienced before? Are there sort of cultural ways that the whole recruiting process and interviewing process played out differently for you?
I'll go first. Sharmila, if you want to go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so one of the major differences that I noted was back when I was recruiting in Singapore, the job search process was very application driven. I could apply and be certain that I would get an interview if my resume and cover letter were of good quality, but that's something that I can say will not work here in the US. Even when I was recruiting for investment banking and even when I recruited for corporate finance, I noticed that I really have to network in order to stand out. In investment banking, it was more like a requirement. The bank, I think, was keeping track of who and how many people I was networking with. But corporate finance, just because there are abundant opportunities, there are also abundant applicants. So in order to stand out, I had to network to be successful. That's one major difference between my job search back in Singapore and here in the US.
Adding to what Shweta said, another difference for me was for all of my internships in India, they interviewed me. All of my interviews were either resume based or based on technical questions. I never had an interview which was behavioral based. So that is something I had to learn after I came here, because a lot of interviews here will have, for consulting, they'll have a behavioral aspect and then they'll have a case aspect. For corporate finance or strategy roles, they'll often have mostly behavioral questions, and then they'll link those back to your resume and so on.
Sharmila, or anybody else, for anyone who's tuning in who may not be familiar with behavioral interviews, what does that look like, or what are some of the common behavioral questions you received?
Some of the common behavioral questions that I received were around my leadership style, around how I managed conflicts, around why I had chosen a career path for myself. There are basically a lot of behavioral questions that they can ask you, but the way to approach that from my perspective would be, when the interviewer asks you a question, try to understand what values he's looking for. He's not going to hire, he or she, they're not going to hire your story. They're going to hire you as a person. So they're looking for a particular set of values. Try to define those values and then frame your story in line with those values rather than the other way around. And of course, follow the STAR format, which is first talk about the situation, what was your task in it, what was the action you took, focus more on the action, and then talk about what the result was.
So in addition to Shweta and Sharmila, I believe, I feel like quite differences between my previous experience and here post-MBA experience. Like they are focusing on more leadership type of questions. So how do you lead your team, or so if you are if you are get offers, so how would you lead your team, or how would you manage your conflicts? So that's a little bit interesting for me, because I worked as analyst or associate level, but my potential employees just expect me to be a manager. So they will be they usually test by my ability to manage a team, or like overcome some conflict within the teams or within the multiple stakeholders. So that's what I feel from difference here but I think this is related to post-MBA type of job.
Sorry, just to add one thing, I completely agree with what Rio said. They are very focused on having, seeing whether you have leadership qualities. But another thing I'd be aware of is different companies are looking for different sets of values. So their behavioral interviews will be in line with their leadership frameworks and all of that. So every company will ask different sets of behavioral interviews. So it's important to know what is important to the company and then prepare for that interview.
Thank you. So the next question I want to talk a little bit about is talking a little bit about how recruiting looks different for those that are on a student visa, an F1 visa, as compared to US citizens and permanent residents. Because I'll say my personal opinion, I wish there weren't as much of a difference, but there can be a pretty significant difference for what recruiting looks like. So who would like to speak to what that is like? And not the most fun thing to talk about, but it's going to be prepared for. So we'd like to discuss that.
Yeah, I'd say, so your accent can be both like the biggest like hurdle, and then but also the biggest like advantage you might have in these networking calls, because especially when you're speaking with someone who you might have only corresponded with over email or through LinkedIn, there might not be any difference. They might be able to see that you've got some work experience with a multinational company, But when starting to get to know people at these companies and you're introducing yourself over the phone, early in the conversation, it is quite obvious that, you're not from the US. And, that's kind of a cultural hurdle that you might need to get through early on in the conversation. For the end result, which is that job that you're after, I'd say, what I found is if you throughout the call show genuine interest in the field, show genuine interest in the company, have insightful questions to ask, seem like you'll, be a qualified candidate, obviously, then maybe kind of stick to that in the call. Like, obviously you'll want to speak about cultural differences, but I think with kind of likability and getting on with anyone, you want to connect and sometimes to speak about, factors that aren't going to bring you together in the sense of like, relatable factors might not be the best strategy. So I'd say, to sum up kind of like my kind of experience with it is definitely like speak to your international outlook and what benefits that has to them as a company, but I'd say don't go out of your way to seem too different, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Sharmila, did you want to add something?
Sorry, I thought Shweta wanted to say something. Do you want to go first? We're going to say the same thing, right? Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So when you're coming here on an F1 visa and you're applying to roles, know that you're not going to have as many options as the domestic students because there are restrictions around sponsorship that various companies have. So your groundwork over the summer has to be to identify which companies will sponsor internationals and then start reaching out to current students, say incoming second years, and then try to get to understand something about that company so that you can start doing your research over the summer. The second is everybody talks about the STEM designation and how that gives you an OPT extension. Now, also know that when you're applying for that OPT extension, you have to show that there is a link, or the recruiter has to show that there is a link between the role you are going into and the education or the degree that you are taking. So if you're going for like a finance kind of role, try to make sure that you get the finance STEM designation and not the operations one. It's just easier to link the two. But that is something your recruiter takes care of, but it's important to be aware of.
Great.
So one thing, so I remember, thank you, Sharmila, sharing that information. I actually it reminded me of one experience in the KPMG. So I applied the KPMG first, like accounting job, but they said MBA was not equivalent for prerequisite for anyway. So it's not, MBA cannot be accepted as this job. So you should change your role. So I changed the role to evaluation, which is more related to MBA types of job. So please be aware of there's very restricted, there are many complicated and then also ununderstandable sometimes restrictions in our visa status or working permission. So please double check with your future employee and also in your second year, the first year, or alumni, so whether the company will support certain type of visa or working permission for you before you apply.
I'll say, I feel like one of the themes for a lot of what we're just talking about is if you all are looking for roles in the US, it's going to be very important that you get familiar with the US immigration system and how it works, especially for those on a student visa, the student visa that you'll be on. I will say it's not the easiest thing to learn. It's not the most logical thing to learn, but it's going to be really important that you learn it. And I know some people say, oh, I don't need to worry about that because employers will know about that. From my experience, not a lot of people at companies know that. I'm a US citizen, born and raised in the US. I didn't know what it looked like to immigrate to the US until I started working in career services. So most of the people that you talk with, you may very well know more about this all than they do, and that is important. It'll be an important part of some of those future conversations.
Sorry, just one more thing. So this is not directly related to recruiting, but it's related to like the administrative aspect of applying for a CPT and all of that. See, once you have an internship, you're going to need to apply for a CPT in order to work for that. Now, when you do that, you need an SSN, Social Security number. So once you get on campus, try to make sure you can get the SSN as early as possible. Try to do an on-campus job so that when the time comes for you to file your CPT, that's one headache that you don't have to deal with. It's already done.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think for me, it took more than 3 months to get the one SSN, and then finally I got the wrong card with wrong name. So they made a misspelling, and then renegotiation. I took another month to get this correct SSN from the government. So that's so quite surprising. And then also one thing I could add more is tax return is very complicated. So because I work here, Tennessee, for the New York company, so I need to file the 2 tax. And then Tennessee doesn't have any state tax, but New York, they have state tax. So tax return after internship was a little bit confusing and time consuming. So please, keep in mind that many administration works could be a headache for you guys. So, but there are some resources, so don't worry. But that's my advice from the second year.
No, it's good that you brought up taxes, because another thing that can be more complicated here is the tax system. I will say, so Ryo mentioned resources on campus, and there is a Vanderbilt International Tax Office. We've got some information on that on the International HQ site that we'll talk more about a little bit, but just having some familiarity with how taxes work here in the US can be really helpful for later. Well, I think what I'll do at this point is I'd love to hear if any of those joining us, if you all have questions, what would you like to ask the panel? What would be helpful for you to know? And feel free to either unmute yourself and you can ask your question, or else I'll be watching the chat box too. Oh, and Rusty, yes, thank you for sharing that link. That's one of the great things to be thinking about is which companies sponsor. There's actually a section in International HQ that's kind of devoted to that. But Rusty is sharing a great resource about how to find applicants that do sponsor.
Just to add to that, Rasi, thank you so much for sharing that. But I would still advise people that they check with the HR while applying, because some companies that they may not sponsor every year, or they may not sponsor for every role. So this is just a very basic list that you can start to work with. But before you apply, I would suggest that you check with the HR to confirm if they're sponsoring in that particular year.
I'd be curious for any of the rest of you. Yeah, was there a sort of a process or a way you did that? Like, would you, use lists like the ones that Rusty shared? And at what point would you bring that up with an employer? Or who would you talk with that? Who would you talk about with that?
I would actually bring it up during the information session, very shamelessly. And I realized there were a lot more students who had the same question as me, but they were just hesitant to ask. So you will be attending information sessions, and the HR will mostly be on the call. So when you have the floor and you can ask questions, I would say ask the HR if they'll be sponsoring. Or even in my thank you notes, sometime after the information sessions, I generally send out thank you notes to all the panelists and the HR. At that time, I just put it in my email if I forget to ask during the information session.
To add to that, that is one, I did that too. Another thing I did is one of my second year friends had made a list while he was going through his internship search. So I leveraged that. The third thing was there were instances where I thought the company would sponsor, but they were saying they didn't sponsor. So I would route my queries through the CMC. Elizabeth has been very helpful with that. She's part of the CMC team, and she used to reach out to the recruiters and figure that out and then get that updated in the system. Also, there's a question about whether there is a list of companies that have sponsored OVN graduates in the past. So I agree with what Emily said. I think even the employment reports will give that information, right?
Yep, it's hard to see here, but if you look on the back of the MBA employment report, we put an asterisk by every company that was hiring an international candidate, and we've done that for the past about 5 years. There's also, you'll get also in 1220, there is there basically, like, this is the public data. We have sort of internal data, and you can get a lot of the line by line data, and you can go through and see which companies were hiring students and which students it was, and if they were on a student visa or not. So you get access to some of that through the resource library in 1220. We'll talk a little bit more about that later.
I'm just going to add something, having watched this over the years. So as the panelists have said, these lists are not absolute. They change. There's a core group of companies that historically have sponsored. You'll see that in all of the data, but on the margins, with any given department or special need, sometimes that companies that are listed as not historically sponsoring have on occasion sponsored. So that's a good thing, but it's not actually published on a list. I think, as you are working, becoming part of this community, talking to us and talking to your classmates and alums, sometimes there are additional opportunities that come available, but things you do want to remember is STEM extension is going to be very, very, very important. That'll enhance the chance that a company would be willing to sponsor, even if they haven't previously sponsored. So there's a lot of need out there in particular areas, especially in technical work, that the chances are there's a possibility that they would sponsor. The other thing to think about too is global companies, because of the overarching situation with the lack of immigration reform in the US in recent years, is that if you do not receive an H-1B or a work visa, working for a company that has an ability to move you to a global location also enhances the chance that they will be open to sponsorship, because you're bringing somebody on for 1 to 3 years, depending on the visa. And if you don't win the lottery, they can move to another location, and you can come back into the US on a transfer visa versus an H-1B. So that's kind of a big picture thing to think about as you're trying to determine where you're going to put your energy and effort into recruiting, but just keep that in mind.
Thank you, Emily. I'm adding just a quick, if you're wondering, if you don't know about the OPT STEM extension, brief description in the chat box. I'll say, so the Masters of Finance program is STEM certified. That whole degree is STEM certified. For MBA students, the finance concentration is STEM certified, as well as the operations and analytics concentration. Let's see. Well, I've got another question I want to ask the panel, so I'm going to hop into that. But please, if anybody else has a question, feel free to drop in the chat box, unmute yourself and ask. But so the question I have is, so we talked a little bit about networking, and we talked a little bit about how networking can be different in different places. When people talk about networking in the US, and it gets talked about a lot, our office talks about it a lot. What does that mean? And what do you think, what does doing networking well look like? Or if you have examples of not networking well, negative examples that you want to share, what would you say about that? And what's helped you to learn it? What's helped you to kind of adapt to networking in the US? Shweta?
Sure. So I was very awkward with networking, especially because where I come from, people are very introverted, and I basically did not have to network to get my previous job. How do you adapt to networking? By doing it. It will first many calls are going to be very awkward. It's going to sound very transactional, but the more you do it, you're going to get better at it. How to be good at it? Don't just talk about work. Yeah, ask about the firm, ask about the role, ask about them, but really try to develop a relationship with them and try to maintain a relationship. It shouldn't be the case that you talk to one person, ask them few questions, and then you expect them to pass you on to the next person. Maintain that relationship so that after you apply and you really want to follow up, you can leverage that relationship to follow up on your application. Because it's going to be very weird if you talk to them, say today, and then 3-4 months down the line, you want an update and you go back to them and say, hi, remember I spoke to you 3 months ago? That's going to be weird. What has worked for me was the first call, I just let them do the talking. They talk about their role, their firm, how they got here, everything, their whole life history. And then I go back to them and say, I send a thank you note. And then a few weeks later, again, I'll say, you know what, we spoke. It was really nice talking to you. I came across this role. What do you think the company's expecting? They'll reply to that. Then again, a few weeks later, I'd go back to them and say, well, you know what, these are my credentials. Do you think I'll be a good fit for this role? And then again, a few weeks later, I would just go back and say, you know what, thank you so much for your guidance thus far. What is the best way to apply? And I would just leave it at that. Now, there are 3 things that can happen after you send this final email. They'll be like, oh, you know what, I'm happy to refer you. Here's the link. Please use this link to apply. That's the best thing that has happened to me. And that's pretty much how I got Adobe. The second thing, they'll be like, you know what, just send me the resume. I'm going to send it to the recruiter. Or the third and the worst possible scenario is they're just not going to reply, or just say, you know what, there is a job portal. Please go apply over there. If the third case happens with you, then just say, thank you so much for your guidance. Is there anyone else you'd like me to speak with or can advise me related to this role? They may not be willing to help you, but they'll be happy to pass you on to another person. And then you repeat this whole process with the other person as well. After some really bad networking calls in mod 1, this is what I've learned, and this is what helped. This is the process that helped me get my internship. Sorry, it was a long answer.
That was great. Anybody want to add to that or anything else?
I'm going to give you a perspective that's completely opposite to Shweta's. So before I get into that, I'm going to tell you networking is not a one-size-fits-all approach. You do what works for you. You do you. Don't do something just because I said it. Don't do something because Shweta did it. Okay, you try different things. You figure out what works and stick with that. Now, for me, I'm extremely antisocial and I do not enjoy it. Like if I approach a conversation with the perspective that I have to build a relationship, that becomes extremely difficult for me. I become very awkward. So I prefer to build relationships by working with people, by meeting them on a daily basis. So the whole relationship building aspect didn't work for me. What did is I built out a framework for myself. I decided from day one that I was going to be very transactional because that's what works for me. So I had like 4 things I thought about. Why am I networking? My purpose was to get a job. That's all I was networking for. The second thing I checked was how much importance am I going to place on getting to know the person versus getting to know the company. For me, it was a 30-70 ratio. For me, getting to know the company was a priority. And then I might or might not work with the person, but do I want to work for the company is what I was looking at. The third thing that I thought about is which values am I looking for within the culture? So I was looking for a culture that would give me frequent feedback, that would make sure that everybody was collaborative. Those were the values I was looking for. The fourth thing I did is I prepared a list of questions that were in line with all of these 1, 2, 3. And then I tried them out on different people. And I asked them for feedback. Was I coming across as too transactional? Even though I was being transactional, I wanted to not come across as such. So it was basically about a little bit of people management as well, what works for whom and so on. And then the last part was I thought about, see, you cannot change who you are, or you cannot Americanize yourself in 6 months. So figure out who you are, what is your culture, your background, and how can you bring it to those conversations. So people might not relate to the story that I'm narrating, but they will relate to the emotion behind it or to the passion that I'm displaying. So that was my process, and it's customizable. Do what works for you.
I like Sharmila's approach. I 100% agree with you. Like, I cannot change what I am now and what I was. So what I did, so one thing I could add is I tried going beyond the ON community or ON alumni network. So I tried to connect with MBA alumni from different schools. So, and then they're very helpful. So please don't think about your network exists only in the ON. But MBA alumni are very helpful because we know there's common language, common words, common experiences during the 2 or 1 year, depending on maybe their MBA program. But MBA alumni or MBA students are very helpful. So please reach out to the other school students. So that's network. That means, yeah, it's networking for me.
Sorry, one more addition. To Rio's point about networking and maintaining those relationships, I also kept in touch with my previous employers because they were like my backup plan. If I don't get a job here, I can go back to them. So try to stay in touch with them, try to keep them updated. They've contributed to your career progression so far. It's just a nice thing to do.
So I wanted to add that a lot of us might have come from more indirect cultures, where the idea of just asking someone, to help you or asking someone for a job might be a no-no. But definitely in the States, a big switch for me in my networking. Early calls, I would kind of focus and maybe take too much time speaking about the companies and myself, and kind of doing trying to get a good conversation going, and then never actually making the ask. So just as you go into this networking game, I'd say a big piece of advice is if you don't ask, you won't get. So just make a point of saying at some point, can you help me? Can you introduce me someone to, if you can't help me, can you introduce me to someone else who can help me? A friend of mine had, and just going back to visas and things, a friend of mine had gone the length with one company that didn't end up, weren't in a position to sponsor. But because he had, remained engaged in the process and he had seemed excited by the industry, he actually got a recommendation from a VP at that company to speak with another bank where, later he was able to get the job. So I'd say just, definitely just ask, and people do want to help you. That's one thing I've really appreciated about the States, and I'm sure you all will too, is good people want to help out other good people, and that's kind of overarching theme of ON.
That's great. Thank you all. So I want to flip. We've got a couple of comments and questions in the chat box. So let's see. One that came out was, when you declare STEM concentrations, and any of our MBA folks, I mean, with MSF, you don't need to. It's automatic. Like, your degree itself is STEM certified. But with any of our MBAs, when did you all need to declare your concentration?
We declared it in mod 3, I want to say. Yeah, 3, the spring of your first year.
It depends on what you're asking about. Declaring the concentration to the school in mod 3, declaring your concentration to recruiters, I added it in my resume.
Yeah,
right from mod 1.
Your concentration on your resume, and we'll talk to you individually when we do resume reviews, but your concentration is a signal to employers a direction you want to go. So as the panelists said, when you start at ON in the MBA program, you are taking core classes across all functions. So you won't have the hours at that point, but you can designate it on your resume that your goal is to work over the course of the 2 years to get the accumulated hours in that particular concentration area to graduate with at least 12 hours in either finance or operations, which are our two STEM designated concentrations. So I hope that helps.
Just to add to that, if you're talking about declaring your concentration to the school, I don't think it is mandatory. It just helps you keep track of all of the requirements that you need to fulfill to get that concentration. But as long as you're declaring it before graduation, I think it's fine.
Great. All right. So something I'm going to flip back to in our final minutes is just a couple of slides. We're kind of wrapping up. So this slide touches on some of the things that you can be doing over the summer, and you can really start doing, please, now. We would encourage you to do these things now. So you should all have or be getting access to the 1220 platform. And if you have, please be checking that out. There's a couple of things we'd really encourage you to look at. The resource library, so we've mentioned several of the resources in that already, events. Over the summer, there will be appointments, and through the pre-3, Jenny will be meeting with incoming MSF students, and we'll be meeting with incoming MBA students as well. More to follow on that. Also encourage you all to look at the International HQ site. We'll look at that in a moment. There's a survey for you all to complete that really helps us get some good information about your background. We outlined some next steps, especially that relate to the job search. There's also International HQ. There's an internship job search model, and that gets into a lot of the lists of where you can find employers that sponsor. And I'm going to be updating that more over the summer. So I encourage you to do that. Also, just overall encourage you to get ready for the fall. Please be working on your resume, your LinkedIn profile. Something that we're going to be talking a little bit, we're going to do another one of these on May 11th. It's listed in International HQ, but we're going to do another one. We talk a bit more about sort of the timeline for recruiting. And one of the things we're going to talk more about that is national career fairs. So especially for the MBAs, national career fairs are a great thing to emphasize. I know I was talking some with Shweta and Sharmila about sort of the importance of those. Even those of you who may be MSFs or who maybe not, in national career fairs may not make sense for, I encourage you to start working on technical or case prep. If you're pursuing consulting recruiting like Sharmila did, so important to start working on case prep. The sooner the better. If you're doing more of an investment banking route like Russi did, working on the technical prep that goes with that, the sooner the better. And then again, Ryo hit on this earlier, engage with your classmates and your existing network. The sooner you start talking with your classmates, the better. That can be so important. So just briefly, this is a screenshot of the 1220 system. So this will not look quite the same when you log in, but one of the things you'll have access to is appointments, and mention that's how you'll be setting up time to meet with us over the summer. Events, this event and some of the other upcoming events will be posted there. And then the resource library as well at the very bottom. A lot of the kind of resources we're talking about, everything about writing resumes, cover letters, finding company lists, a lot of that good information is there. This screenshot is of the International HQ site. It's a Brightspace page. You can see there's a whole module here for pre-arrival. So I encourage you to be looking through that. And then here's the internship and job search section that we mentioned as well. So International HQ is something we designed just for international owned students. So please put that to use as well. Lastly, there's a lot coming up for everybody, but there a big list of things coming up for MBA students over the summer. So a lot of these things are already in 1220 that are coming up. So we want you to be aware of those things as well. So yeah, please check 1220 for more on that. So that's all we have for slides. Maybe just quickly before we finish up, I'm curious, panelists, is there kind of a brief last thing you'd like to share if you were to put yourself back and think about when you were coming into Owen a year or 2 years ago, what do you wish you would have known at this point? Or what do you think would have really helped you?
Should I go first?
Sure, great.
I think the mistake that I made was I did not want a network, so I pushed it off too late, and then I was very rushed because in mod 2, I had not yet spoken to my second years, and then I did not have enough time to network with. I mean, I did have enough time, but it was very rushed. I was talking to like 17, 18 people in a week, and that was a lot. So I would say start networking early on, especially as international students who don't know how to network. I think the more practice you get, the better you will be. So start in mod 1, talking to second years, try to be like halfway through mod 1, and then start reaching out to alums so that you have time to network for your backup plan as well.
That's great. And I think, you can start the networking now with your other classmates to start getting to know your classmates. And then, yeah, like you're saying, as classes start, you can start talking with second years or MSFs, you can start talking more with MBAs. So yeah, that's a great idea. Shweta, what did you have in mind?
For me, I would say do not disregard your plan B. After recruiting for investment banking in mod 1 and mod 2, I finally got one offer, but then I decided I didn't want to do investment banking. The process was so grueling, I didn't think I could take it for a job. And that is when I decided to switch to corporate finance. And by then, I wouldn't say it was late, but I was cutting it close. I was scrambling to put in applications and networking. Something like corporate finance, it doesn't require as much effort as investment banking. So I wish I had started putting in applications in mod 1 and mod 2 as well. It never hurts to have a backup offer. You can always negotiate the time you have to accept the offer, but at least you will sleep in peace knowing that you have an internship for the summer. So do not disregard your plan B. Start working on it right from the beginning. And please attend career fairs. That is one regret that I have. It is an excellent opportunity to get internships. So if you can attend, I don't know if they have a virtual option this year, but if you can attend it in person, please do attend it.
I think we'll go over that a little more in as we get into the summer and we get more information from the national organizations. But my suspicion is they'll all be in person. The closest one will be in Atlanta, National Black. So
yeah, at least National Black you should attend, if not the others.
That's a good point. Rusty or Ryo, anything that you would want to add? Any sort of last thoughts?
Yeah, I would say please prepare for case interviews. So if you're really interested in the consulting firm, so Sharmila is specialist, but I took several different consulting firm, and then in the final round, I got unexpected case. So there is no material. So partner asked several tough questions from scratch. So I think it's these kind of questions are not covered by the typical type of case studies. So they are testifying your fundamental abilities. So anyway, but please prepare. And then also, if you are interested in international firm and working in your home country, please prepare for your case interview in your own language as well. So I switched several times. So during the interview, my partner switched to Japanese and English to Japanese. So they are testify your bilingual ability. So please, please prepare for case studies. So, and then memory calculation is the key. So now I think McKinsey does not providing a memory calculation, but AT Kearney, PwC always provided memory calculation. So please prepare, and don't forget this from math from GMAT.
Great, thank you. Rusty?
Yep. There's this distinction, I think, between kind of the make or break calls. Either they fall under the category of networking, or they'll be kind of explicitly termed interviews, right? And just general kind of informational interviews. Those are the early calls you're going to be having with people in the Owen network. I'd say maybe this is more MSF specific because we don't have as much work experience. But I found that especially when you're wanting to go into an industry as complicated as like banking or consulting, or honestly anything under the umbrella of finance, There's a lot of terminology that it took me a while to get comfortable using myself, and it really helped to have Owen alum just explain it and explain their day to day. So especially this early in the kind of process, don't stress too much about being the most impressive person on the other end of the call. Just ask really insightful questions, so you can gather as much from these resources. That'd be my kind of big advice at this point in the game.
That's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, excellent. Thank you all for your time. We appreciate your questions. Panelists, it's been great to see you, and thank you so much for sharing from your own experience and all the ups and downs of that. So I think we'll go ahead and stop the recording here in just a moment, but I'll stick around if there are any last questions, but otherwise we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. So